Hello and welcome to the 6th session of Qwernomics, path-dependency, and semiotic fatality. I'm going to pass the mic off to Nick Land.
Right, great, thanks, Theodore. I'm treating this session as a introduction to QWERTY analysis session, and I'm going to try and do everything in uncontroversial steps. Hopefully, I'm going to end up with an initial discovery, as far as I'm concerned, and hopefully it will be persuasive to people by that point. But let's see whether that is in fact the case. One kind of substantial digression on the way that I hope also might be useful. So I'm going to actually begin by just posting a link to something that I hope some of you guys can probably do something more with than I can. I'm only taking some very sort of minimally suggestive elements from it. It looks incredibly interesting, I think. And the reason I think it's relevant definition, this paper is trying to show that there's this general schema cutting across all these different fields. Strong echoes, and which involves basically understanding relations between two objects connected by a morphism. And I think that what we're dealing with is a morphism. And it even seems to me that that term isn't particularly stretched. But this is something I'd be interested in seeing what other people's feedback is on this question. So minimally, we have the same set of elements shuffled between an alphanumeric series and a QWERTY sequence, and we're trying to get some maximally rigorous purchase on what has happened in that transformation. And I think this is the same question as what is actually the kind of structure of the morphism concerned, which is highly complex, I think, in this case, and needs to be sort of broken down into pieces and looked at in stages. So my preparatory digression on this, before looking at QWERTY in particular, is to contextualize what we're doing within a field based on the analysis of abstract apocalypses. And I want to just present fairly quickly a simple of an abstract apocalypse that I think is then, through some kind of analogy, relevant to what we're looking at in terms of QWERTY. So my neat toy model of an abstract apocalypse, I think, is a important one, and I'm going to call it hexaclysm. And it's the abstract apocalypse proper to the I Ching or the Zhou, among other things. And it's produced purely through binary exponentiation and digital reduction, decimal numeracy. So it involves 6 elements, or ultimately more than 6 elements, but a morphism that connects 2 sets of 6 elements. And it's to start off with the first 0, the counting numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If each of those numbers is treated as the binary exponent, so we're looking at 2 to the 0, 2 to the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, etc. Sorry, it's I'm already yeah. Sorry. Let me rephrase this. It's we can do that by, you see, by twisting it around. It's a cycle, but it's neither if we just say it's each of our counting numbers minus 1 is binary exponent. So 2 to the 0th through to 2 to the 5th, and that our transformation, our equivalent of the transformation between the series is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 goes to 4, 8, 7, 5. I don't know whether this is actually even working on the sidebar. It's interesting, among other things, for our purposes. Well, I think this series is important. Over and over again in the decimal numerals, it structures the I Ching, which is the oldest book in existence, perhaps, and almost certainly the book of numbers that we have. It has other applications, and for our purposes, it's weirdly gone into reverse for me on this thing. If you look at these two series, the morphism between these 2 series, it actually has a strong, you can see clearly what has happened. What has happened in this transformation is there's a set of zones, you can say, depending on how you're going to think about it, 3 or 4 zones. First of all, there's a zone of consistency. Like the first 2 digits of this series remains unchanged. This is sort of weirdly suggestive of what happens, obviously, in our case with the numeral segment of the keyboard, but that there's no solid basis for seeing that as anything more than purely suggestive. And then in the remainder of in the last 4 digits, there is it maps it very graphically, vividly. It maps an event. In the middle of those remaining 4 digits, there is an impact or introgression of alien elements. These 2 new digits, 8 and 7, impact upon the sequence, and in doing so, you can see very specifically they then produce a nebula or halo around them. Is basically a splash zone. The digits 4 and 5 are pushed out to the edge of that impact site, and 2 other digits are ejected entirely. So 3 and 6, for interesting reasons, it turns out, that probably go beyond what I want to say, are simply ejected from the series. And so in this morphism, in this transition, in this abstract apocalypse that takes place, converting this 6-digit string into another 6-digit string, there's basically a graphic, vivid image of an impact from outside that produces a splash or crater and ejects certain elements outside of the system concern. So I think it's an extreme, I would say, a beautiful little apocalypse, and we can see really clearly what has happened when we see that, and its relevance is also very pronounced because it's, as I say, it's an abstract apocalypse that has produced the oldest book of numbers in anywhere in the world. But our quevulsion is vastly more complicated, and the introduction of certain methods, as a set of interlocking, changeable methods in all confident progress with what it is we're seeing. There's nothing that is immediately as graphically obvious about what has happened when we're looking at quevulsion as opposed to the hexaclysm. So what are these methods? Well, I'll take this in 2 stages, because I think first of all there is a sort of set of methods that relate to the issues that came up in the first part of the course about processes and path dependency. So obviously, in terms of insofar as we're looking at path-dependent complex process, it's defined, as we saw by David, as an anergodic process. This is something he'd taken. This is absolutely standard Santa Fe definition of what you're dealing with complex processes. And that's to say that when we're looking in this mode of analysis that I think we've now crossed away from, but I'm just returning to momentarily, when we're looking at the QWERTY as a social, historical, technological process, we have to be definite, the complexity people tell us, that we're not looking at an ergodic process. There is no free process of selection from some series of random possibilities that between them exhaust the whole range of possibilities. We're locked in to a much narrower path constrained set. But I think it's still worth for us to at least look at what would happen if we were in the mode, scientifically convenient mode, even though it's deeply misleading in these cases, if we were looking at our object as if it were an ergodic process that was at work. And so what would our sequence look like as an ergodic process? So it's very easy to you simply have a set of 36 Scrabble tiles, but with the 36 because you also have the decimal numerals. You put them into some kind of container, shake them up, like thoroughly randomize them, and then just pick them out one at a time, place them in order, and produce their for random reshuffling of the alphanumeric sequence. This kind of mode of analysis is obviously very, again, suggestive of thermodynamic, statistical mechanic type of backdrop that the complexity people are working from. But that's, I think, a little bit misleading, because just the arithmetic of what we're looking at here is not based upon logarithms and exponents in this case. It's based upon factorials. So the number of different ways that you can sequence a set of elements n is equal to n factorial. You know, if you've got one element, it can only be sequenced in one way. So, you know, 1 factorial is 1. 2, there's just 2 opportunities, 2 factorials, 2. And then it starts very quickly. Factorial is 6, 4 factorial is 20, factorial is 120. Each time applying the total you've reached by the next number in the sequence. So the full alphanumeric series has, there's 36 factorial different ways of arranging that sequence. A 36 factorial is a very large number. If we're just looking at the, it obviously climbs super exponentially. If we just, as we have been doing, cut out the numerical sequence of that and just concentrate on the alphabetical segment of it, 26 factorial, it's a number that busts your calculator display. My sort of quick calculation of this says that 26 factorial is something north of, significantly north of 3.6 times 10 to the 26, which is a big number. It's not quite elementary particles in the universe number. That's I think 10 to the 79 or 10 to the 80, but it's extremely huge. And if you were dealing with an ergodic process, the chance of any particular total outcome, if you reproduced the alphanumeric sequence by pulling it out of this thoroughly shuffled cup, then the chance of doing that should be 1 over 26 factorial. It should be this minute, super improbable number. And obviously the same modes of calculation with certain sort of restrictions, all of those that you find in the QWERTY sequence. And within these terms, the amount of order we see is just immense. You know, we've that the numerical segment is almost replicates the it's in the alphanumerical series. I think it's worth like breaking that into 2 parts. It's all you're doing, adjusting one element in the sequence, but also all of the 10 numerals come at the beginning of the sequence, which is highly improbable outcome. And I think you can put a number on that. I think that the chance of just those numerals together in any order whatsoever, let alone in the highly ordered form in which you've got them, is equal to 36 factorial minus 26 factorial. That again is astronomically improbable. So this is all at this level simply confirming the fact that we are very, very, very distant an ergodic distribution. It's simply, as the complexity people are asserting in this other context, it's simply absurd to think that we are actually dealing with anything like that, that QWERTY is some kind of randomization in a strong sense of a numeric series. But if it isn't a randomization, then what is it? I think this is then sort of narrowing our task a little. This is where I think that we need some specific relevant methods for trying to get a sense of the amount of order and the distribution of order and the specific structure of order in the QWERTY sequence, such that we can understand what happened. What is the morphism? What is the abstract looking at when we see this transformation? And so, as I say, the method that I think make just direct sense at this point, we look at it in a couple of different ways to try and suggest that. So we want to, if we're going to end up, I'm going to want to do some hypotheses about what has happened. We want some sense of evidence, and we can see that we can't use these, we can't use any readily accessible notion of negative entropy or its close equivalents to understand that. We need something that's closer to the grain of a highly restricted path dependent. And I think the obvious way to start with this and to introduce some quantities into our analysis, that we're going to recognize a minimal information of transposing one element. So moving one character from one position to another position is a unit of transformation, and therefore we can kind of produce numbers attached out to how thoroughly certain segments of our object have been reshuffled. There's lots of things that people might want to do at this point. People, I partly mean things that there's a strong temptation for, and I certainly don't want to rule out, but I'm at least shelving because they are unnecessary complications at this point. You might want to say, for instance, we don't want to just quantify, we don't want to just treat as one unit moving one character from one position to any other position, but we want to measure the distance that is being traveled, we want to mark a difference between moving one character in a sequence or a short way. Obviously it's not difficult to add definite numbers for that, but I think the level of complexity that it would be introduced would not immediately pay off for us, and it was just unnecessary complication. So we're saying at this point that a unit of change, a switch, involves moving one character from any position in the sequence to any other position in the sequence. So we now go to the QWERTY distribution, which comes obviously in 4 rows, which analytically is helpful. I mean, it sort of suggests ways that we can break it up. And we've already seen that there are good reasons for treating the numerical sequence as separate and shelving it, at least temporarily. To if we were taking our out of a out of a bowl and putting them in order, we would expect that roughly half of the sequence would be in order. I don't mean consecutive, I just mean in order. So if our unit of change is just one of these switches, the state of equilibrium for a system, if there's sampled, is going to be rough half of the unit considered. So for instance, numerical segment, there's 10 units there. We would expect to put it in order, we would have to do 5 because you're going to get a certain amount, just by chance, you're going to get a certain amount of order for free. There's only, things can only be, there's only 2 possible states. It can either be or out of sequence, and if you're getting more than half of your units out of sequence, that's a sign of actual order. It actually starts becoming improbable, and this is relevant to our object, as we'll see. Numerical segment of QWERTY, one fixes it, takes it into, it's completely symmetrical. It takes it either from the alphanumeric series to QWERTY, or you have to do is move 0 from either the beginning or the end of the sequence to the other side. So that part of our object has just one switch. As I say, we'd expect, because there's 10 elements in that going to take 5 switches to do it. So just one switch being required shows a very, very substantial amount of order in that system. So while we're just looking at this at the point of putting it on the shelf, let me just switch to the other mode of doing this, which is completely equivalent, which is that this number, the number of switches 1, is the reciprocal of the number that you get if you take that sequence as it exists and you simply try from any position in the sequence to produce the longest ordered sequence of elements. So we can see we've only got 2 choices with our numeral section of the QWERTY keyboard. Basically, we can start with 1 and count neatly all the way to 9, and then we lose it because 0 is then out of order. But we've got 9 elements in order and only 1 out of order. So we can get to our 1 switch being required by simply 10 units minus 9 equals 1. The 2 are exactly the same. So what happens if we do now put the numerals on the shelf and look at the rest of the keyboard? And there's one thing that immediately massively jumps out at us, which is that the middle row of the letters, the home row, is again vastly ordered in the terms that we're employing now. It's approximately as ordered as the numeral section. It's not quite as ordered because we're only dealing with 9 keys rather than 10. So it's going to lower the amount of order that we're talking about. But in exactly the same way, we can try these 2 reciprocal operations. How many characters do we have to switch around to put it in order? and I'm not saying, just to repeat, sequence, just in order. One, you obviously, all you have to do is move the S from the second position to the last position in the sequence. Or again, reciprocally, you start from any position you want in that sequence of characters, and you just count the number that are in order, and all of them are in order except the S. So we count, we've got 8 characters already in order there: A, D, F, G, H, J, K, L, all neatly in order. Only one anomaly in the series. So I think this is kind of a striking and crucial phenomenon that we're looking at here. This is just an extremely strong indication of tendency in action, of the distance that we are from any kind of ergodic distribution. And in our question that is constantly lurking, like, what happened? However we're going to think about it concretely in terms of like the Scholz's personal psychology, the ergonomics of the distribution of the keys, various concrete hypotheses we might have about how the keys that they did. However we approach this concretely, and we will always be in hypothetical mode doing that, I think, because the historical evidence is just fuzzy on this. Rigorously, it has to be said that what has happened is that the system has just inherited and reproduced and conserved the order that it was already incarnated in the alphanumeric series. It's beyond any serious question that there is just basically a chunk of the alphanumeric series that has been reproduced on the home row, minimally adjusted, and exhibiting a level of order that is comparable to that's found in the numeral section of the keyboard. So we can see already from that we're not dealing with a homogeneous object. We've in our 4 rows of keys, we've got 2 now that are ordered. The other 2 rows, the Q to P row and the Z to M row, are much more difficult to get a purchase on. And again, the method is the same. You can go either of the way. You can use actual Scrabble tile, put those rows each in turn in front of you. How many switches does it require to put it into alphanumeric order? Not consecutive order, but because we're just dealing with a segment, but into it so that every character is follows in the same sequence that it would follow in the alphanumeric series. That no character that is prior to another in the alphanumeric series, it comes later in the QWERTY series. And the top row is hugely disordered, and in a way that's extremely intractable. So intractable that I'm not going to try to make sense of what's going on in there at all in this session. Everyone is invited with great enthusiasm to hypotheses about it. But you have to move no less than 6 characters to put it into order, and which is obviously more than we would expect a complete distribution taken out of our shuffled cup. Intriguingly, from my point of view, for reasons I hope, this is improbably disordered. So what happens if we turn it around? What if we treat it that somehow it's backwards, and we try to put it in order, and it's actually more disordered in reverse, just marginally more. It takes 7. You can only consistently, there's 10 characters in this Q to P row. You can only, the largest number you can count in order, hopping freely along the row. When it's the Q to P order is 4. That's obviously the reciprocal of our number 6 for the number of shifts that we need. If you turn it around, you can only find units in order. It's extraordinary. It almost seems to be that somehow some kind of effort has been put into ordering it and making it intractable. But as I say, I'm now bracketing that problem as beyond the prospect of immediate progress. My last stage of this right now is to move on to what I think is a discovery. And I'm hoping it kind of provides a model of what a Qwerty-analytic discovery looks like, and what we then make of it, I think, is then a supplementary. And that happens when we look at the bottom row in particular. And what we find there, I think, is very definite evidence about what has happened. Track sense, as I say, you can introduce a psychological story, an ergonomic story, all kinds of these concrete narratives about why. But we're dealing with it at this level that I think goes beyond that. So our question, what has happened, is highly abstract and is independent of any of these concrete hypotheses about the sociological, psychological process that has been in this distribution. And what we find with the bottom row is that it's only 7 characters in length. It takes no less than 5 switches to put it in order. That is, again, crazily disordered, and the again, reciprocal conclusion, rigorously there, you can do it this way instead, is if you start from any position on the bottom row, counting forward left to right, how many keys can you, which micro sequences or subsequences can you produce that are in order? And the answer is only 2 characters. You cannot, there's no way to construct a subsequence out of that bottom row that has more than 2 characters in alphanumeric order. But I think the absolutely decisive point then is, unlike the top row, the bottom row of the keyboard has clearly been inverted. And it's not only been inverted, but it's been the bottom 2 rows have been folded. So just take the bottom segment of the keyboard on its own round. So now you have rather than ZXCV BNN, you have MNBVCXZ, it now only takes 2 switches to put it into alphanumeric order. And at the risk of extreme repetitiousness, that means that no less now than 5 characters can be constructed there's only one way to do that neatly, which is MNVXZ. All of them are in order when the row is reversed. The B and C characters are clearly insertions. They've been flung out of the home row and inserted again in reverse order, but there's only 2, so I'm not going to make much out of that. But the remainder, the other 5 characters, are already in order if it is reversed. And as we can see, if we are just proceeding along the home row and we get to L, we not only have alphabetical order in proceeding to M and N, we have actual consecutive continuity between those 2 rows. So I think that we have the first, in terms of looking at this as a kind of abstract apocalypse or a kind of geological convulsion, we have definite graphic result. We can see that what has happened here is that a sequence proceeding basically ASDFGHJKLMNBVCXZ has been broken and folded over to rows. And we have this weight of evidence behind that conclusion, of the fact that it's just the amount of order that is revealed on the basis of that hypothesis is huge. It only takes 3 switches from the whole of that sequence that's now 16 characters going from A folding over to Z. It only takes 3 switches to put the whole of that in alphanumeric order if we make that one assumption. So I'm basically going to kind of stop monologue phase at this, but just to say, so this seems to me like a confident analytical discovery about what has happened in the production of the keyboard. That whatever the concrete story is about that decision making, that we can see that has taken place purely by this mode of sort of the distribution of order in that key, in those keys, which is telling us a story about how this has actually. And so I think that there's a bunch of questions. It's probably just like, what do we make of any of this, or what consequences it have? But the more immediate procedural question is that, so how can we make any kind of sense of what is going on the Q to P row of the keyboard, of that section of the QWERTY sequence? But okay, I'm gonna hand it over now, or whatever. I'm hope that I'm. Yeah. This last point about the spell typewriter, that is obviously one of these concrete, you know, quite how you categorize it, whether it's kind of partly ergonomic, commercial, whatever, and it's a really important element of the narrative, the historical narrative behind. I think it definitely can't be ignored. But I think that there's then a question of like, if you then pursue that to the maximum level of abstraction, what are you wanting to say about it? And so, for instance, if you just wanted to engage in some process that the only criterion of that process was that you ended up being able to write typewriter just with the top row keys, and I'm not at all resistant to. I mean, I think that's extremely compelling sort of narrative that we have there, but it obviously is only partially explanatory of the kind of other elements that we find in that system. It doesn't tell us why we've got Q in that row at all, or the other elements of it. So I think we can try to integrate that with something that is more abstract and detached than just a historical narrative of any kind. Yeah, I don't know whether I'm hearing any. If anyone's trying to speak, then I'm not hearing them. But, yeah.
I think it's working fine. I think everyone's
Okay.
just sort of
Good.
taking it in.
Good.
I'm looking at the pattern you were just tracing, and the biggest ejection point is between the B and the V. If you start at A and you just go step by step and see what has been switched or ejected. When you get to the B and the V, you've already, in this process just now, you've already swapped out the B and put it back between the A and the S. But then, so we would be at N. So then between N and V, there's the largest chunk of characters which have been ejected sequence into mostly the top row. That's just something I noted.
Between B and N in, if you're starting from the alphabet, if you're starting from the alphanumeric.
Yes.
Yes. But also they've been, I don't know, because obviously almost all, if we're defining order by conservation of alphanumeric order, consistency or constancy between these two sequences, almost all of that order, if we're not looking at the numerals, is in this home row. It's immense like that. And let me just take one step back, because if the total number, if you treat the QWERTY sequence naively as a whole, and so you've just got Q through to M, and you're saying how much disorder, how much reshuffling has happened. I think it's 17. You need 17 switches to put it in order. And I say this without 100% confidence, but quite a lot of confidence, because it's, again, the sort of check option here is to just see how many characters you can put in order by starting from anywhere in that Q to M series, and what's the longest sequence of ordered characters that you can produce. And almost all of that is in that home row, because you go from D through to L. It's almost not only ordered, but almost consecutive, isn't it? I mean, E and I have been kicked out. But other than that, you're just going straight through. And so from the only character prior to D in the QWERTY sequence that is also in order is A. So you don't get anything at all in the top row. You get you're just getting this massive amount of order just on the home row, and then you can add just one more from the bottom row if it's ordered naively on this left to right order. Like, you know, you've got A, D, F, G, H, J, K, L, eight characters all in alphabetical order, and then what, you know, you can go LZ, LX, LV, LN, LM, but you're only going to add one more ordered character, whichever you choose, proceeding then forward to the bottom row. And if you're going in the other direction, you lose order, because if you're not starting with A, you want to start with something else. Well, you can start with E, but that means obviously you have to lose D as well. You're becoming more disordered, whatever you try to do. So it's this massive repository of stuff. So now if you're saying, well, in the alphanumeric sequence, something's happened between B and N, you might ask, well, why do you start with B there? You know, it's like a C is also out of place, isn't it? And M is also in place. So it's that particular chunk of characters D through to L that is your repository of order that has been conservation preserved in the new sequence. I'm sorry, Anders. Maybe you can push that again, and I might not just be getting.
Yeah, sure. Let me just clarify what I was saying.
Argument for that.
And you were breaking up a little bit, but I think I got everything you said. I'm just saying that if we follow your method of starting at A and then going to the right, and then on top of that method, well, what I was imagining, I was just going through the alphabetic sequence and seeing where each letter went. So if we start at A, next is B, and we can see that shot down to the lower row, the fourth row, and then C shot down to the fourth row. And then we have to deal with S. And then E got bumped up just up above, just like a little short distance away.
Yeah.
And then F, G, H, I got jumped up into the right. J, K, L, M, N, O shot up to the right. P shot up to the right next to O. And then now we're back at B. So we've done a large jump back to the beginning of the alphabet in terms of the distance of the letters in the alphabet. And so we have to deal with...
When you go back to B, you mean? Yes, yeah. I guess, but
so I'm just counting the number of characters which were ejected, and so when we go from after we deal with B, and we
cut off a minute, Anders. Can I just take a second, because I just got thrown off and
sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I just probably missed like a sentence.
Oh, okay. I was just saying, B, yeah, first of all, there are a few characters, S and B, and one or two others that I mentioned, which are larger jumps in the alphabetic sequence going either back or forwards. But then after we deal with the hurdle of B and we get to V, between N and B is the largest number of ejected characters from the original alphabetic sequence going to QWERTY. So let's see, O, P, Q, R,
right, okay.
S, T, U, all of those have been ejected.
So that's
what I'm saying.
Okay, this is good. This is good. Because what you're, obviously, it's got to be part of what we decide about the
That's, yeah, 7 characters. Some, and there's 7 characters in the home row. It's the same number of characters in the home row as are in order.
Yeah. Top row is from this particular, the bottom row, that position with, yes, strong, isn't it? You get almost, you get the majority of the top row by seeing how being extracted from this particular interval that is sort of represented by the letter B, isn't it? Yes, I'm getting you totally and persuaded.
Cool. Yeah, and only S, C, B, only S doesn't end up in the top row. S, C, and B, I think, are some of the largest out of place jumps in the sequence overall.
Yes. I mean, the BC thing, it's such an effort for me not to get into dodgy notaricon space, because, you know, where all of these dates, this, you know, what's going on in AD and BC and 1,000 Plateaus, if you start being at all suspicious about that, and then you notice how anomalous these particular letters are in the QWERTY sequence, it definitely, you know, sets weird bells ringing a little bit, I think. But I guess I'm trying to be constrained about that kind of, I think that speculation gets a bit unpersuasive quickly, or into weird space. Yeah. But I think what you've just said, Anders, is really great. Actually, if I seem to be reserved about it before understanding, I take that back completely without any hesitation now, because I think that's totally right. We've identified a big part of this thing, what has happened. That most of the top row, whatever we're going to say about this typewriter story, the word typewriter story, we found what has happened. It's been extracted from this identifiable zone and relocated onto its own stratum.
Yeah, I think it's also potentially very significant that it's the same number of characters that are consistent in the home row as have been ejected from the largest ejection point in the fourth row. Yeah, I think the ejection, this like tracing the order that you discovered, going from the home row and then inverting on the direction of the fourth row, it's a really interesting method, but I don't know where to go from here. How to make a persuasive argument for how each of these ejections was decided, or why, or if it, you know, if it makes any kind of sense.
I don't know. One suggestion possibly is this: is we can attain a level of abstraction and analysis where we don't have to ask that question. It's not that it isn't potentially interesting, but essential to what we're trying to do. You know, the pure QWERTY analytic discovery is independent of any sort of historical narrative about what was the reasoning behind that, or what, you know, we don't have to narrativize it, because we can identify something that has persuasively taken place, that has occurred, without needing to justify that through this kind of type of historical storytelling.
I see.
I think there's two separate. Let's just take your example. So there's this chunk of letters from O through to U. We can see where they've come from. We can, you know, their source in a certain sense when it's relocalized in the QWERTY sequence, and we can see where they've ended up. There's been this just process of transposition or transportation that has a certain kind of systematic structure to it, and that is true irrespective of the motivations that were required or sort of lay behind that decision. So let's just say, oh, you know, there's a kind of ergonomic, commercial, historical motivation to be able to write the word typewriter on the top row, and that somehow played a causal role in this transformation that we're talking about. But the actual structure of the transformation itself is independent of whatever that story ends up being. I think, you know, that story is never going to be more than hypothetical, whereas we can say what has happened at a level of analytical confidence that exceeds that of the purely hypothetical historical narrative we attach to it.
Yeah.
Yes. Look. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not being distracted now a little bit by Theodore's got a question. I think it's good, and that's one. In terms of these principles of method, I think that is a that's a very persuasive one. You know, if we're going to say, well, how are we going to count these transformations? So is it that we can say, rather than just a switch is to take one character and place it in a different position, that you can take one character or any chunk of consecutive characters and treat that as one unit of transformation? And that is highly persuasive. There's only, though, when you notice, have the sequence as it is right in front of us, and you're ignoring the numerical segment, there's only two zones of consecutive order on the whole keyboard. Well, three in a little way, because on the home row it's interrupted. So I has been taken out, and so you've got these, you know, F, G, and H, and J, K, and L are both ordered, and then we've got O and P are ordered on the top row, but there are no other ordered sets of keys to be found anywhere, unless if we do this thing of switching, reversing the bottom row, of seeing it as this process of folding and breaking, that means we should be reading it back to front, then M and N are also in order, but then that's it. That only provides you with this one other little thing. I think it's a good suggestion because it makes us think about, well, what is our unit of transformation? And the unit of transformation is almost certainly complicated than just moving one key from a certain position to another position. But we don't have a lot to work on, in the sense of, like, once we're off the front row, there's almost a negligible amount of consistent, consecutive structure to work with.
Yeah, and can you clarify something? I was working off of kind of an insertion model. So when you go from A and then B gets ejected, it gets inserted between, I'm thinking, V and N. But you could also do a swap where you take the, you swap S and B, what's written on them. It's just you could do either one, but which one?
Sorry, I think I need to get you to run that past me one more time. I'm not quite.
Oh, okay. So if you're going F, G, H, and then I gets ejected up and to the right, I've been thinking that if you wanted to make that a swap, you wanted to reverse that operation, I would get pulled back between H and J, and a new key would be inserted there. Whereas you could also think of it as a swap, so you would have to swap what was written on the J key and the I key in order to reverse that operation.
Okay,
so there's two ways you could do it.
If the set is going to be messy, isn't it? Like it seems to me like you're the first way you articulated that I has been simply taken out, and
it's much easier to think about.
Transposed to the O, works much better than saying that we'd have to swap it. I mean, there's no way you can swap it without producing more disorder than you're introducing, isn't it? Or you're producing more disorder than order. Like if you had to swap J for I and then J's out of order, and you know what I mean? You're in terms of the sheer economics of this, or the measurement of order, you're not making it cleaner, you're making it messier by saying that.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that. And so then it is more of a sequence. We're looking at it as more of a sequence than like a grid.
I think that I don't know. It's an interesting question because it's back to this principles of method, and I'm trying to keep our kind of quantification, where you could sort of, if we're talking about it as an abstract apocalypse, our sort of devastation index for these different zones of the QWERTY sequence. I'm trying to just keep that process of measurement as neutral and practical as possible without introducing certain hypotheses. Like if we were to say, well, we have to do all of this by process of swapping, then it seems to me we're sort of introducing some substantive hypotheses about the kind of process that we're dealing with. And it might be that that's helpful. I mean, I think in certain cases it's very persuasive, but it seems to me that it's like you're losing a certain amount of neutrality in doing that, because this original measure is so lacking in any hypothetical commitment whatsoever. It's just simply a way of trying to get a quantitative estimation of the amount of order that has been preserved or lost in any particular transformation as neutrally as possible.
Is there a sense that the method we use, though, might have to respect the physical layout itself as a cost of reordering? So in other words, if what has happened with the disorder going from the alphabet to the QWERTY is in a sense a function of this kind of historical mechanical process, then to account for the amount of damage that's been done, would you not also have to include maybe
lost a sentence? Can I just get you to repeat? You've just glitched out there.
Oh, sorry. If in a sense we're looking at the disorder that's done as being a function of kind of this mechanical historical process, then should we include in the numerical cost, in the quantified cost of reordering, the same criteria for mechanical reordering? So in other words, if we reorder by moving tiles rather than swapping them,
Right.
Are we not properly accounting for just the amount of difference that initially constructed this change? If that makes sense.
No, I think it's a really interesting and complicated, and yeah, I think it, because there's two different levels this is working at, I think, and trying to be coherent between them is a challenge. One is the most abstract level of this, so we're really trying to kind of describe what has happened with maximum independence from any kind of concrete narrative. So what's the highest possible level of abstraction that you can apply to this transformation. And then the other one is to try to be maximally realistic, or it's got to at least be compatible. Whatever you end up with has to be compatible with a realistic socio-historical technological story. So now you're taking us, I think, importantly, you're saying, well, let's not lose this second part of it. And I think that's a complicated question. We're going to try to be realistic on this second level and say that however we end up setting up our kind of analytical principles, it has to at least be compatible with a historical story. But what is that? When we now are trying to be concrete, what does that mean? Because what is actually easy or difficult at that level, at that concrete level? Like, when Scholz is drawing up the keyboard for the first time, I'm sort of assuming, okay, I'm going to be really, really crude in the hope that other people can make this a bit more sophisticated. But the most crude thing, all he'd need is just a piece of paper, a set of blank key slots, and he can just insert these characters anywhere he wants. At this stage, let's assume he can insert these characters anywhere he wants on those blank key slots, so originally of a mechanical typewriter keyboard. The only constraint is that there's only a certain number of keys, and then we have these mechanical and ergonomic features to do with. We don't want the actual keystrokes to interfere with each other mechanically in the mechanism and these kind of constraints, but they seem very different to these kind of abstract semiotic constraints. So easier on that concrete level of characters together or to swap as opposed to just extract and introduce. I'm very clear about this. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm not really seeing what the costs, these concrete costs are in this. What we would expect or predict if we're going to try and build that in realistically.
Right. I mean, that makes total sense. I guess what I'm thinking is if it's just going to be a symmetrical account of what the cost was to get there to begin with. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. You can abstract it. You have the sheet of paper that you can reorder it and then replace as the tiles. And that will give you an idea. You could figure out what the cost is just to reorder those. I think what you don't have though is, you're right, you would just lose that symmetry of the cost of what that original disorder was. I'm not sure if I'm making sense with that.
No, it seems to me like important what you're saying. So I would like to press you to clarify that, because it does sound important. I mean, sorry, can I just say, I think this notion of cost is something that is probably really worth trying to get a grip on, and it's a very slippery notion for me here. You know, I think if we really did have a kind of concretely realistic sense of cost that we're introducing into this analysis, it would obviously be relevant, but it would probably be extremely complicated. You know, for instance, it would be a cost. This is like the typewriter story. Sorry, I'm sure everyone's familiar with it, but I should just bring it in. It's one of these kind of basic narrative components of the QWERTY story, which is this thing that the driver of the distribution is that you can't have two keys, actual sort of typing heads, close together if they regularly occur close together in, for instance, T and H together. Those two keys, they're actually next to each other on the writing heads. Then those two things will kind of jam together and interfere with each other. And I don't know whether any here is old enough as I am to use the mechanical typewriter, but this did actually happen. You know, you'd be typing and you'd get these kind of typing heads would just kind of mesh together and interfere, and you know, that's the real cost. So there's an economy in a kind of distribution that avoids that kind of mechanical error. But I'm finding it hard to sort of either to generalize or abstract this notion cost in a way that will kind of transport us up to the abstract level of analysis neatly. I was interrupting, but actually trying to get you to come back with what you're saying, because I do think it's
no, that's absolutely understood. No, I'm having the same problem there. So I feel like that is definitely something that should be accounted for. But you're right. I mean, I'm not clear on exactly how you do it.
I mean, one thing that would be fantastic.
Can everyone else hear me? Did we lose Nick?
Hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we lost him.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I think
He
I'm
was
gonna.
just about to tell us too.
Okay, he's back. I think.
Sorry, I just got chucked again.
That's all right. Are you? Can you speak for just a second? We'll see if your signal's okay.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'll just try and say what I was trying to say before being chucked off, which was that to try and coordinate these two different levels of analysis would be just fantastic, but I think really hard to do, which is the sort of questions that would bring us like back to this zone that Theodore was talking about, for instance, like, you know, do we want to talk about moving chunks or blocks of characters around rather than just talking about treating each individual character as a kind of totally discrete unit? So that's on this very abstract, I think, semiotic level of analysis. And then this level that Mike was introducing about the concrete technological costs involved in the mechanism and how that is actually producing constraints on the distribution of the keys. Now, if there was some way, if there was some translation system between those two sets of concerns, that would obviously be completely fantastic. But I'm not seeing what the clue is at the moment for bringing those two things together. So yeah, that's an interesting open question for me of whether that can be done.
Nick, did
Yes.
you see the episode a few minutes ago? Here, I'll post it again.
Sorry, Anders, what? I didn't catch that.
I said, did you see this link I posted a few minutes ago? I just posted it again in the sidebar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
My computer's. I'm assuming all these problems in my end. So again, I'm a little bit nervous about bandwidth.
oh, let me get you a direct link and it will load better. If I can do that.
Okay, it's all right. I think it seems to be okay. I've loaded it.
Okay. Yeah, this is a base 26 numogram that I made using substituting the alphabet for the numbers. So it's just a direct substitution. So A is 0. And just one note about it. It's interesting in that unlike any other numogram that I've done from base 10 below or base 16, it has a path going back to 0 from XC back to A. But I was just looking at this and I noticed that a lot of the syzygies in this fold the alphabet directly in half, similar to how the lower 2 rows of the QWERTY keyboard are a folded alphabet, sort of, that's had an apocalypse. A lot of the syzygies are adjacent keys on the keyboard, either.
Okay.
Yeah, either, but sometimes across the rows, vertical adjacency as well.
So this is. Let me just make sure I'm getting the mechanism, which is that a syzygy in this system is summing to 26. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that so? You're giving A a value of 0.
Yeah. So Z would be then 25. So they're summing to 25.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I think that's consistent. Right. Yeah, I think that works.
I hope I can. I mean, it's a great diagram. I think it's going to take some processing, obviously, but you're saying that there's a pattern that you think comes out that it actually does reflect certain patterns that you're seeing on the keyboard.
Yeah, so you would have to count how many of these did show up adjacent on the keyboard to see whether it was significant. But at first glance, I noticed several that, like X and C is popped way out of its original sequence so that it can be right next to X, and that's the third. And
you've got S and L together, I note.
No, H and S are a syzygy, and L and O are a syzygy, but L and O are next to each other on the keyboard.
Okay, so what's this? Oh, this S to L arrow.
Okay, I think I had the bigger arrows are the currents, the smaller are the gates.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's just a little hard to read because there's so many letters and arrows.
Yeah. I think it needs some calm reflection. So I probably shouldn't try to process the whole thing right now. Yeah.
Well, you can. It's the same pattern, basically, a spiral on the top at the bottom.
Yeah, I shouldn't. I'm worried, Anders, that if I ask you some of the obvious questions that come up from this, I'm going to be taking everyone off on a weird digressive path that might be really strange. I mean, but
that's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to.
Have you found in all of your different modal numerograms that they all tend to have these kind of peripheral vortical systems, or is that something that only arises in some of them?
I've done numograms from 0 to 10, and then I did a base 16 hexadecimal one, and then I did this base 26 one. A base 16 numogram, which I could also post the image for that, has an interesting little island similar to the XC island that's kind of floating off to the right there, but the island in the base 16 numogram only goes back to what would be 9 or Z. So it doesn't go all the way back to 0, it only goes back to Z. Base 26 is the first one that I found, the lowest one that I found, although I only did the ones I mentioned. Base 26 is the lowest one that I found that goes all the way back to 0. I did them wrong because it doesn't even, I don't even understand why that would happen on some of them and not others. Going back to 0.
Sorry to interrupt you, Anna, but I'm now just regressing into a really gross practical mode, which I can see Amy saying that she's got computer problems. Is there internet catastrophe happening at the moment that's not just my problem, or is it just coincidence that Amy's also got a problem? Okay, are they? And
Or Amy, is your internet okay?
because because I'm getting quite a lot of kind of people, you know, it's like generally kind of manageable. I'm asking lots of people to repeat sentences. Anyway, maybe there's nothing we can say about this at the moment.
Yeah, it seems like both you and Amy are having some connectivity issues. I think it's coming up on Nick's end primarily, but I'm not positive. But I think Amy was just saying she's down for the trip down the rabbit hole with Anderson. And, yeah. Hi, are you there?
Yeah, Amy was saying her connection's not down.
Got
she's
chucked off
down
again.
with the discussion.
Sorry, can people hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
I haven't had a problem with anybody but Nick yet.
Okay.
I think my problem is also localized here. I've been having internet problems all day, so you know, continue on. It's cool.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, mine is just behaving really badly as well for some reason.
Anders, did you want to continue? I don't want to interrupt you if you were saying something earlier.
No, actually, I was finished. I just wanted to share that diagram, point out the interesting feature of that diagram, which is that it has a path to zero, and point out that I noticed a lot of the syzygies from it happen to be adjacent on the keyboard, whether horizontally or vertically. And I don't know where to go from there. And
Yeah.
am I understanding what you guys were talking about, right? That it's hard to come up with a trick of what a cost is when we're talking about why there's a switch, what the transformation is?
Yes.
Okay.
So sorry, yeah, Anders, what do you get? Yeah. Sorry, Anders, were you just going to say something about this cost issue, or?
Oh no, I just wanted to understand it correctly. There's a few ways you could come up with it. You could measure the actual distance on the keyboard that it's ejected, or the number of spaces alphabetically. Did you see this algorithm I wrote? If you scroll up a few screens, I can paste it in again if people want.
No, yeah, you might, and because every time that I get chucked off, I lose the sidebar, and so I'm afraid.
Let me paste it in again. Here. Okay, I just wrote this, and so there's the alphabet at the top, and then I'm just counting through the alphabet and listing all the operations that are necessary to go from the alphabet to QWERTY, but without the element of physical space that says where they're ejected exactly, which would be the last part.
Right.
And
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That looks again something.
And it's
interesting.
Pretty minimal, the number of operations required.
Yes. I mean, I think there's this undertow to this conversation that is difficult, but is really important. Do with trying to harmonize these different levels of analysis, because I think we don't want abstractly to be inhibited by the necessity of a historical narrative, which is only going to be hypothetical. On the other hand, we do want, whatever we end up concluding about the order of the QWERTY distribution, to be at least consistent with some plausible sense of what has actually socially, historically, psychologically, technologically taken place. It's no use to end up with something that just couldn't actually be part of a historical story. And obviously what you're doing here, I think, is a very good intermediate type of discussion of this, because whatever just concretely happened to the keyboard, I think it's surely safe to say is going to be something roughly like that. You know, let's just say Scholz is sitting, it would just set up a kind of fake, but in principle not absurd, historical hypothetical narrative, and we've got Scholz sitting around with his business partners, and you know, all of these people, he is in the role of the kind of mechanical expert of the actual functioning of the typewriting machine, and got a salesperson who's saying to him, wouldn't it be cool if we had typewriter on the top line, and all of this kind of thing. And they're discussing how they're going to move the keys around. They all start with the default alphanumeric series, culturally accessible to them. It's like if you were just simply going to go with the default to just in path dependent terms, if you were just going to follow the path without the slightest deviation, or what you would do is you would just simply reproduce the alphanumeric series on the keys. But they obviously, for various technical reasons, that isn't what they do, and so they have some kind of let's say, to use your word, algorithm that is telling them, well, we're going to do this and that and this and the other, and after you've executed those series of procedures, say, you know, like maybe there's has to be an implicit hypothetical narrative. It's ergonomically improved to put S on that side of the keyboard. We want S on the home row. You know, it's kind of in terms of the weighting of the two hands. It's improved if we have a kind of a common character like S on this side. Whatever, you know, I think we can just, in a sense, bracket the details of that narrative. But you want, in principle, there to be some narrative of that kind that could be formalized in a way much like you've done it in that version, and that formalization is going to communicate in both directions. It's going to describe at the abstract level what has happened purely in terms of the semiotic redistribution, but it's also going to potentially be these hooks for these concrete historical narrative. This letter was moved from here to here because of XY plausible historical motivation. So I think that's really good.
Yeah, thank you. I have this visualization also of, like, when you resize a web page and some things, you know, drop down to the next line. If you started out with just the alphabet on a single line and then you were to, you know, squish it and resize it, which letters would pop out first? Which letters are the lowest priority to maintain their ordering, and they would be ejected with priority. And then it's just a matter of where do they land, which direction are they being ejected, and where do they stick.
But okay, again, that's like interesting. I'm going to be skeptical to maybe just push you a bit further on it, because like, let's just say we've seen that the home row is a very peculiar, privileged zone of the sequence. So let's just say that we're starting from the home row, and stuff is being ejected from that, sort of for the in the way, if I'm understanding you, you're suggesting. It doesn't seem to me that the pattern that you're seeing is that. Is it like, you know, you B and C both seem to me to be letters that you would hold on to, and before, like, for instance, I don't know, J or K, I mean, I would imagine would the E, which is the most common letter in the English language, isn't it? It's one of the ones that gets squeezed out. So whatever the criterion for this squeezing out process is, it isn't an obvious one, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know what it is.
It's not that you're essential letters on the home row and squeezing out process going on.
Did we lose you again, Nick, or are you still there?
Yes. There's at least two other conversations going on in the side, both of which I'd like to get more of a grip on. I don't know what order to do them in. Like, Amy's asking or making suggestions about notaricon, and there's, can I just ask, because it's the one that's totally mystified me most, how did we get onto the Nephilim and the giants and that Elohim? Sorry, is that connected to the notaricon point, or is it, or where's that coming from?
It's a little bit of a coincidence, and it's just sort of based on a conversation Amy and I were having a while back. It's just that the passage from what I guess is it looks like a manual of notaricon and Kabbalah, practical Kabbalistic work. The passage quoted from it in the wiki is about the Enochian canon, or sort of like the Enochian story of the Nephilim, of the angel Grigori coming to earth and mating with the daughters of men and all of that, an apocryphal text. It's about like a coded reference to that in Genesis, Psalms, from Psalms.
Right.
Which
I'm sure it must be in Genesis. Yeah. It's bizarre how much is in Genesis.
Yeah, it was it's
the Nephilim definitely are in
Genesis too. Yeah, which I just thought was interesting, like a relationship between the esoteric practice and the apocryphal canon. And so we just sort of we're getting on the same.
We're riffing. We're riffing off that. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I mean, my sort of initial thing is going to be a bit disappointing, because by notaricon, I'm meaning something really inane, which is just simply the actual associative characteristics of the particular letters, rather than just engaging in this kind of quantitative mode of discussion that's kind of oblivious to all of these wider kind of cultural connections that might be involved. Because I think once you do get into that, which is extremely tempting, but you're in much territory and territory where your hypotheses become hard to make compelling to a skeptical audience. So at least on one level, I'm hoping that there's things that can be put in place in terms of what it is to analyze the QWERTY distribution that are just profoundly uncontroversial and don't require any kind of commitment to arcane and implausible beliefs or ideas. And I'd have to say, on the surface at least, saying that the kind of the driving process behind the QWERTY distribution is in some fundamental way tied up to the Nephilim mating with the daughters of men in the Garden of Eden would have to go in the wild hypothesis category, I would have thought. Oh yeah.
Two things I did notice in making that list of steps, that algorithm, is it seems like you can analyze it as, well, one common operation is ejecting characters together as a pair or a longer sequence. And another one is inserting characters between others to split them. And then
Right.
And then only I noted that A or S, B, and C are the biggest time traveler characters, and that S is pulled in near the beginning, and B and C go very far back in the alphabetic sequence.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
But again,
right. Now
that's
again,
the limits of that mode of analysis.
well, I don't know. It's interesting. I think you're on to another stage of analysis, because look, the good thing about this is that it extremely crunchily, in terms of you can put definite, uncontroversial numbers on these transformations. You know, the distance. Certainly, it's if once you go into 2 dimensions, it becomes more complicated, obviously, because things are not migrating actually along the line. So it's much nicer to linearize it, because then you just have absolutely perfectly clean numerical operations about a certain character moving a certain number of places, or in one or the other directions, in the transformation from one sequence to another. It's obviously, I guess, just to be a bit repetitive in saying this, that if the goal is to interlock ultimately with some plausible narrative about the functioning, let's say, of typewriters, then it's got to be the 2-dimensional distribution that matters more, doesn't it? I'm assuming. You know, the one-dimensional distribution is is highly abstract and notional in relation to the actual functioning of the typewriter, whereas the 2-dimensional, in all these ergonomic mechanical senses, it's the 2-dimensional distribution that actually is going to be the one that takes us into this language about costs and advantages of particular modifications.
Why not the 3rd dimension? It seems like the digits are really important here.
Well, it's a 2-dimension only because you can just produce a map of the keyboard on a. So you don't need to actually build a 3-dimensional keyboard to fully translate the information key to content of the keyboard. So that would be, you know, I don't even know how any 3-dimension. I mean, there obviously is some, because it is a real physical object. There's obviously is a 3rd dimension involved, but I don't know how to describe that three-dimensional aspect, or how the 3-dimensional aspect has been historically propagated and conserved. So, you know, Scholz's keyboard machine was a 3-dimensional machine, but it seems to me it's only the 2-dimensional features of that machine that have been transmitted to us in the keyboard layout. And when you say the layout, you're talking about that 2-dimensional distribution, not anything that might have been happening in a 3rd dimension. Yes. I mean, if people are going to go away and dedicate at least some fraction of their time to thinking about this, about the Nephilim and the Elohim, what is it that should be the guiding points of that? I mean, I can totally see they taught us stuff. I think that definitely is in the oral tradition, it's supposed to definitely be the case, isn't it? That the whole magical tradition has come down through the actual spoken of the Nephilim.
Yeah, I'm going back and trying to find the passage now because like my head won't let go of this for some reason. I don't know, just maybe look at some of the Greek and Hebrew describing the things that they taught us, and if there's anything particularly interesting in there. Like I noticed, like, you know, the egregore kind of theory. I mean, like, this is totally kind of off topic of you know, abstract or collective intelligences that organize us. And
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
That term egregore is the same word used for the Watchers, for the angels sent down to Earth. Egregore is where Grigori comes from. It means a watcher.
Oh, yeah?
One who, yeah, interestingly.
Yeah.
But I mean, this would just wander off. So if there's more discussion to be had closer to topic.
Yes. Let's
sorry,
see.
though. Would someone quickly summarize the connection again to the Nephilim and the Elohim?
So there are 3 prongs, or 2 prongs really, in terms of relation, and just one was that I was looking through about Notarikon, and one of the sort of more famous examples is this relationship between Psalms and Genesis, where references to the Nephilim are encoded elsewhere in the Old Testament, and the other bit was just that the Nephilim are described, or those angels, the Grigori, are described as having taught man, I believe, like numerical techniques and counting and like generally simple things like magic. I mean, like, there's a huge list of stuff that we get from the metalworking and cosmetics, but among them, I believe, is like esoteric arts and numbering. So it's just kind of interesting there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
This ribbon farm piece is super cool, Nick. I love
Did
this.
you? I don't know whether you saw it before. These guys have a kind of egregore running.
Yeah.
Running thread. Yeah. I mean, this is, I think, yeah, it's not, I'm not even sure it's going to be that easy to articulate, but the fact that we're talking about the Nephilim, and I think I would even put it in there's on a certain sufficiently abstract level, Anders' modulus 26 numogram, in a certain sense, belongs at a similar level of this, which is the suggestion that the QWERTY distribution has some kind of occult teleological distribution destination. You know, that there's kind of that pattern, like when Anders says, you know, he draws a 26 element numogram, finds these kind of relations between the characters, and then sees certain kind of echoes of that on the keyboard. The thing that's obviously like totally striking about that is that it becomes, if not exactly incompatible in principle, with a kind of with what I've been calling like a concrete historical explanatory story about the distribution, at least is stressed to an extreme degree, isn't it? I mean, what one is kind of pointing at is some extremely deeply buried mechanism that is generating convergence between a sort of set of practical mechanical concerns that pushes some redistribution, and an outcome of that redistribution that encodes these, I'm assuming, very precise, definite and necessary semiotic results. So I definitely see, obviously, the attraction at both of these levels. But I think to me, the sense of what are you trying to achieve with Qwernomics is to try to build it so at least it doesn't become fully detached from this, the ground level that we started with the socio-historical process. Because as soon as it does, even if you want to end up saying, actually this semiotic distribution is a kind of message, you know, and it's not at all that I can't see the appeal of that, but it's going to be just, it's going to lack theoretical compulsion unless it can at least be seen as being plausible, a plausible narrative on this kind of historical and level. I'm assuming.
Fair assumption.
Yeah, this is kind of what I was getting at with that visualization a few minutes ago of if you had the alphabet just sequentially in a single row, and then you were to like shrink the box and have letters pop out one by one as the box is shrinking. And yeah, the question is, what is the decision-making process for which letters get popped out first and where they go?
Yes.
Yeah, an example of that one example is you could say either the smallest chunks get popped out first or the biggest chunks get popped out first. And if we said the biggest chunk got popped out first, it would be those subcharacters between N and B or N and V on the bottom row. Implies, and this is getting to my point here, which is those 7 characters, all of them except S go to the top row, which what it looks like we could kind of reconstruct the history, and so then we're going from this timeless abstract mode of analysis to the historical side, is that originally maybe they started with the top row, the second row that has a Q now, starting instead maybe their first typewriter we know is just A through Z across the top row and then the second row and then the bottom row. And then they realized that that was slow, and so they shifted it all down one and they popped out those 7 characters and put them on the top row because those were chosen as 7 characters which needed to be typed faster because they're being pulled from like the most hard to reach zone of the keyboard, which is the center, lower, middle, and then put into one of the easiest places, the top, spread out. So it's going back and forth between like this.
Yes. No, I think
Internal,
that's right. I mean,
historical at a fine grain.
I think this is right. I think that, look, there's two elements to this, and I think that we can be confident both of these things have happened. Okay, maybe maybe your fundamental proposition here is actually in the end the most unproblematic in terms of sort of triggering the least sort of theoretical resistance, where you're saying, you know, this particular chunk of keys have been just lifted out and deposited. We've got a question then about the procedure that was involved in ordering them, because we've seen that that top row is extremely disordered. You know, it's actually to a degree that's quite fascinating. It's disordered far more than one would expect it to. But the second thing, which is the fact that somehow this bottom row was folded backward and reversed. Like, I mean, I guess what I'm sort of wanting to argue there is I'm fully confident that that is the process that happened there. You know what I mean? It's like you cashed out into something like a scientific p-value, and I cannot do that at the moment. I'm not even sure exactly how you would do it, but gradually, in terms of the kind of different ways that you're constructing things, and it seems on the base of that absolute sequence on the bottom row is reversed, and you can see it's been folded over from the row above because of the fact that you just consecutive keys that you just follow in that absolutely strict sequence, J, K, L, M, N. So then the question is, well, okay, what concretely are you suggesting happened there? You know, if it's kind of, if you're confirming it at some abstract level, that's definitely what you're seeing, like, oh, if you like, almost information theoretically that that's just there as a fact that has happened. What's the kind of historical narrative for that? You know, I have to be suggesting that somewhere along the line, Scholes more or less lucidly took a block of the alphabet and just turned it upside down, turned it around. And I think I am sort of forced to try and argue that, even though I have no, at the moment, sense of how you would kind of you tell a story like that, or construct that as a narrative. And so what I'm saying is that is a kind of, that's a general syndrome of what is going to happen as you start trying to map this thing. That if you find something that seems totally convincing on this level of pure semiotic process, then to the degree that you attach to that is the degree that you're implicitly committing yourself to at least a hypothetical story on this technical and historical level. And I think that your story, you know, is sort of invitingly compatible with the typewriter sort of hypothesis, isn't it? Meaning, you know, that we need these particular keys on the top row, so our salesman, without having to skip between rows, can write the word typewriter and impress potential customers going door to door trying to sell this machine. It, you know, it looks like those two different modes of approach, at least you can see them fitting together, I think. your sort of algorithmic mode looks to me like it could kind of skip between those two levels relatively plausibly.
Yeah, it does seem like it can be a middle ground, but it's always incomplete because it's going between these hypothesized stories and the imminent observations, and which are also
Yes.
almost a kind of hypothesis, because we're choosing how to describe
Yes.
the transformations.
Yes. Well, I think the thing is that between those two levels, a kind of infrastructure that then allows these more exotic hypotheses to develop themselves from, because your theories have to be consistent across this whole spectrum of analysis, doesn't it? It's something, whatever is going on the level of communication with the Nephilim has to be something that plausibly could instantiate itself historically in the mechanical production of the typewriter. There has to, in principle, be some kind of translation protocol that a certain set of mechanical, perhaps, if not in themselves strictly mechanical, at least they have to be compatible with a set of mechanical considerations that are being processed by Scholes and his team at the point that they're setting out the typewriter, have to then be compatible with these exotic semiotic functions that arise once QWERTY has been installed as this new cultural matrix. I'm wondering, in terms of Amy's point about these keys, when that happened. Like, obviously, I think it's now become a convention, hasn't it, on a computer keyboard. I wonder whether anyone knows when that appeared. So I better not sort of go too far down this, because I'm gonna get into bandwidth problems. I'm assuming that those were not standard symbols on the old mechanical typewriters. Yeah. Let me see. Like, okay, I've got an old. Where's this one from? An old Remington Rand. Now, what is consistent? I haven't got a date on it. The QWERTY order is exactly the same, but the keys, you just have these punctuation keys. So it's got, it's a little bit hard to see, actually. I guess I shouldn't start posting this to people. All right, sorry, I'll stop. I'm just meandering. I'm just meandering. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's it's getting exotic in the sidebar.
So where are we trying to go with this? Or are we trying to produce something? Are we trying to produce the method or some type of conclusion or vision of QWERTY, or both?
Well, I think obviously it's not something that I can program on behalf of everyone. What I would like to see, at least as part of it, is that there is a there is a set of kind of confidently installed analytical methods and a set of specific quasi-analytic conclusions. And by that I mean, yes, I mean for me, the one that I brought to this class is for me a kind of a guideline in my own sort of sense of this, of what it is to discover something about the keyboard. And it is the fact that this, you know, if I'm asking this question, which I always keep coming back to, you know, what happened? What was the actual abstract event, the morphism that took us from the alphanumeric distribution to the QWERTY distribution? Then, you know, part of that is this particular sub-event of this particular segment of the letters being kind of folded over and broken at a particular point. That is an event, and it's for me why I find it so hard to resist bringing the geology of morals with this, because you know it has this geological character to it. To me, what's happened there is something that just is so resonant, logical process of stratification that it just is this process of just buckling, folding, stratic compression that then happens and leaves you with these two bottom rows that you can just what do you make of that? Okay, there's that whole set of questions, and then there's the other more down-to-earth question is like, well, even if to your satisfaction you've demonstrated that this happened on this abstract level, you can sort of see it just by counting process based upon
Shoot. Hey, Nick. Okay.
I was thrown off again.
That's all right. I think you're okay right now. So.
Yeah, sorry. Just to finish off this thing is just to say, you know, even if you can see that has to have happened, you can see it's happened. How did it happen? You know, why? What? The difficulty with that is that you're inevitably just stuck in not get beyond hypothetical mode. Like, you know, other various possibilities, that there's some kind of conscious or unconscious psychological transform involves is thought processes in relation to the disease that leads to this systematic inversion at a certain point. I don't know. It can't possibly be more than a kind of hypothetical thing, because I just think that we imaginable historically. I'm assuming we want there to be a level of just realism, compatibility with a realistic historical story.
It seems like if you're talking about the abstract transformation from the alphabet sequence to the QWERTY sequence, if you're going to look and see what the abstract transformation was, that it almost is like it has to be a single. Oh, I will wait a second. Single step is what I was going to say.
Okay, you can go in yours.
I'm really sorry about this, guys. I don't know why my connection is so terrible tonight. So sorry, Anders.
Can you hear me?
I again get you to repeat like the last sentence.
Sure.
Sure.
Great. Okay. Cool. I was saying that if we're looking at the abstract transformation which has occurred between the alphabet and QWERTY, it seems like if it's abstract, it necessarily kind of happens as a single step, or you could say, what is the meaning of the transformation? I'm not, into like intense semiotic philosophy, so I don't know if that is accurate to say, but to me it seems like it's this single kind of swoosh of movement going from, so what is that shape, what is that transform? And what that transform means kind of is going from this kind of idealized abstract prior order of the alphabet to the instantiated existence in space-time and in history. So it's like someone spoke a word and made this previous pattern, or you could even go a step back further and say there was a step before that where we went from some type of non-alphabet or unordered alphabet to the initial alphabet ordering, and then a second step from there to QWERTY. And each one is going from more abstract and less instantiated, and so therefore it has less of an order and less historical influence on its current form to more of that. Maybe. I don't know if that plugs into what you're thinking or not.
Yeah, I'm not 100%. I'm getting. Look, you see, one of the ways that it's kind of subsequenced nominally is by something like your algorithmic model, isn't it? And that is completely compatible with a kind of transformation, like we but very little. So basically we do this and then we do this, then we do this. That is the temporality of that process is completely, again, abstract. Not that you had a series of keyboards released into the market which incrementally manifested these various, the whole set of transformations.
I think we lost Nick again. Okay. We're also, just so everyone knows, we're 5-1, and I'm going to have to end a little, just sort of on time today. Can everyone hear me right now?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm not right now is probably not the best time to end the broadcast, but maybe when Nick comes back, we'll just reiterate that we're meeting tomorrow evening for EST, and yeah, you guys will have to translate the 7 p.m. EST to wherever you are.
I don't know if anyone else delved into it, but I think Nick mentioned that last week or the week before, reading the 3 novellas plateau from 1,000 Plateaus in relation to the what happened question. I don't know if he's still interested in going into that, but that could be like this one kind of thing we could think about doing as well. I'm just saying this like in his absence, which is kind of useless, but just thought I'd mention it in case anyone else was interested in going there.
Yeah, I'd sort of like to go back to that too.
But how many lessons have we got left, including tomorrow?
Tomorrow will be the 7th, and then the last session will be next week Saturday, which is the 10th, and that's the final.
Cool.
So 2 more. Cool. So I guess maybe we'll wait a couple more minutes for Nick to bounce back in, and if he doesn't, we'll end the broadcast and start again tomorrow. Anders, can you expound on the encore thing?
Inquire is how I was pronouncing it. So what the argument I kind of been building over the last few minutes is, Nick was saying that he's thinking of like what is the abstract apocalypse which occurred. I think he's mostly saying to the alphabet. Kind of let's assume that we're starting with the alphabet, and then what's the abstract apocalypse or transformation which occurred to change that into the QWERTY either linear sequence or physical keyboard arrangement. So what I was saying is that transformation, if you are trying to define it as an abstract type of transformation, the abstract is extended and unextended. It's a single point and it's everywhere. So it has to be a single gesture or a single flow of movement from the initial sequence to the final sequence. So it's a meaning. So what is the meaning of the difference between the alphabet and the QWERTY sequencing as a single word? And so I said that word is inquire. And what that word means is going from the abstract to a historicized arrangement. I might have to repeat that now if people like it.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I was completely computer. I don't know what the hell is going on with my thing.
Well, actually, just because we're
so yeah, Anders, what did I miss?
Okay, yeah, go for it, Anders. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just repeat that, and let me just take a moment and retype for Nick because it won't let me copy and paste what I put in the sidebar. So just hang on one second. Saying that the word itself. I'll just say it out loud. So the argument I've been building for the last few minutes is that if Nick is trying to think of the abstract apocalypse which occurred to the alphabetic sequence that transformed it into the QWERTY sequence, if it's an abstract apocalypse, it necessarily has to be a single gesture or movement, and it has a meaning, or it is a meaning. It's basically a meaning. So what is the meaning of the transform between the alphabet and QWERTY? And then I said I defined that word as inquire. It's like someone speaking a word from the alphabet or on the alphabet. And when you command the alphabet inquire, it means in history from this idealized former self. Yeah, so I'm defining that word as that as that imperative of going from abstract and eternal and uninstantiated to historicized, influenced by that, and specified. Like in Buddhism, they don't make the type of distinction in Western philosophy. Instead, they say fully specified reality and not fully specified reality. So it's a continuum in that epistemology.
Yeah. No, it's like, I think it's totally consistent with this paper I connected to, from which I've been drawing this language of morphism, because among the sort of the set of strict analogies that the author's trying to draw between these different fields of science, and saying that this intermediate, the morphism, it can be translated into computer science as a program, so that you've got your data structure A, execute the program data structure B or whatever. So I think what you're saying about the word, it's the implementation of a program that is quite complex, but will just produce this comprehensive transformation and manifest a particular outcome. And obviously the manifestation we have the QWERTY distribution, which allows us to set this up as this question: what happened? Because we can, just like in the Deleuze-Guattari novella thing, you see the situation, you see the outcome, and then that's revealed to you, that's manifested, and the question is just, well, how did it come about that we have result, this outcome is really consistent with the kind of vocabulary that you're suggesting as well. Your vocabulary in a way is coming more from the other side, but I think it's totally consistent.
So we actually have to end the session sort of on time today, just because we have to start another session. But we're going to be meeting at 7 p.m. EST on Sunday.
Okay, cool. All right. And I do apologize to everyone for how crap it's been tonight. And so, yeah, thanks for everyone's patience in that respect.
All right, sounds good. So we'll see you all tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Theodore.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for the stimulation as always. Okay. See you tomorrow, hopefully.
See you.
Bye-bye.